Welcome to Sack Nation. Today we're going to be talking about Lamar Jackson. Now, for everyone who's been living under a rock the entire time, he was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens with the 32nd pick, obviously. And Lamar Jackson probably has the most hype around him since Ray Lewis was playing on the Ravens. I mean, geez. You see him get drafted, it was on media boards everywhere, NFL.com. Every analyst was saying that he was going to take Joe Flacco's job, maybe even by the starting date of the season. Now, whether that's true or not really sure. Me, myself, well, I'd rather look at the roster to determine that. So when you break down the Ravens roster, you've got obviously three quarterbacks. We've got RG3, you've got Joe Flacco, and you've got Lamar Jackson. Some people don't take RG3 too seriously, but that's, to be talked about for later. Now, when you ask if Lamar Jackson is actually going to replace Joe Flacco, you've got to ask yourself, why the rush? What would cause Joe Flacco to be replaced by Lamar Jackson? Because even though fans want it, fan hype and media hype isn't necessarily enough. So the only thing you should be examining, in my opinion, to start off is how well Joe Flacco's actually going to do in the season. Now, to predict that, I feel like you have to kind of look back at his past. Let's look back at the past 4 seasons for Joe Flacco. Pretty much every season since he's won the Super Bowl, he hasn't performed too high. Now, people have a habit of leaving out 2014, in which, in my opinion, he had a great year. I mean, but again, just biased Ravens fan over here, so not surprised people forget about it. Under every single season that he's thrived, like the basic principle says, you actually have to have some type of weapons, unless you're Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, to do well in the NFL. Now, he's had a pretty good offensive line some of the years, except for 2013, in and out of injuries. But let's start with 2013-2014, the year right after the Super Bowl. Joe Flacco, coming off of that win, got a pretty big salary jump. With that salary jump that he got, his $120 million deal, some people seem to think he kind of lost it. But I mean, the only thing the Ravens really seemed to have lost were their receivers. As soon as Anquan left, his number one guy, Jacoby Jones, got cut the following season, but we'll talk about that in a second. There was really only Torrey Smith, and I think Lamar Jackson had just joined the roster himself. Now, don't get me wrong, Torrey Smith isn't the worst weapon in the world, and Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco have never really connected that well. Evidence being that after Joe Flacco tore his ACL, Lamar Jackson almost had a 1,000-yard season with Matt Schaub and Jimmy Clausen. And you top 2013 off with Joe Flacco losing Dennis Pitta and also having Jim Caldwell as an offensive coordinator. Now, he's not the worst offensive coordinator in the world, but let's be honest. Joe Flacco's been through way too many offensive coordinators and learned way too many offenses at this point, which I feel like he personally doesn't get enough credit for. Jim Caldwell's currently the Lions head coach, and they still don't have a run game. So I'm not saying that it's all his fault, but at the same time, I mean, you can kind of see where the problem lies at. Joe Flacco's never exactly been the type of quarterback that you want throwing the ball more than 30 times a game, which clearly means that you have to have a pretty strong run game at all times. Now, Jim Caldwell got fired, which is pretty much evidence of the exact thing I just said, and they put in Gary Kubiak, a run specialist, also future Denver Broncos head coach. Gary Kubiak honestly led the Ravens offense pretty well, considering the fact that Joe Flacco had a 91 quarterback rating and 27 to 12 interceptions, which is the second best year of his entire career. It kind of looked like the resurgence had happened. It was the second best year to 2010, where he had 93.6 quarterback rating, 25 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. So that pretty much showed that Joe Flacco got the help that he needed. But the following year, in which Gary Kubiak left, Steve Smith proceeded to get injured halfway through the season, and Torrey Smith ends up leaving the team, along with Gary Kubiak as well, so Joe Flacco was right back in the same spot. Now, fast forward to just last year. People are pretty much fed up with Joe Flacco and the Baltimore Ravens offense, even though he's coming off of 2 Mark Trestman offenses, which is just awful, just so bad. Everybody, Bears fans, good God. Anyway, 2 Mark Trestman offenses and no real leading receiver in a torn ACL, combined with multiple back injuries that he actually had. His career is pretty much having anything that can go wrong will go wrong for Joe Flacco as of the past couple years. Now, I know some people are sitting there wondering, how is any of this Lamar Jackson's problem? Well, it's not, but it also is. Because in the first 8 games of the season, Joe Flacco performed pretty terribly. But he had a lack of chemistry, a new offensive coordinator again in Marty Mornweg, and there was a lot of things he was getting used to. Now, no excuses. You do bad, you do bad. But in the last 8 games, the Ravens also started to pick up on offense pretty fast, especially considering that shootout with the Steelers at the end of the season, which we won that. That made me really salty, actually, but different story for a different time. And the Ravens ended up finishing the year averaging 24.7 points a game, which was in the top 10. I believe it was exactly number 9. if they can carry on that momentum now with all the additions they seem to have added to the team in John Brown, Michael Crabtree, Willie Snead, plus other draft picks in Jordan Lasley and Jaleel Scott, Tim White, Chris Moore, and Brashad Perryman. I don't know how to feel about this guy. A lot of people like to yell bust, but at the same time, I see what he did in 2015. Point is, Joe Flacco has a lot of weapons, so it might go differently this year. They start off with the Bills, so that's not necessarily the hardest, but they're not exactly the easiest at the same time. So based on the schedule and how Joe Flacco performs, we'll decide whether Lamar Jackson actually starts or not. Now, I know it'd be easy to say that Joe Flacco's washed up and that he's going to be done. I know Joe Flacco split the franchise fans completely in half. I mean, you've got one half that says Joe Flacco, I'm so sick of him, and the other half that just says he doesn't have enough help. Now, while he needs to do a better job, but he hasn't had enough help on his side, at the end of the day, I firmly believe Lamar Jackson's not going to start at all this year, considering the fact that Joe Flacco, under pressure, hence playoffs and every other situation, seems to perform pretty well. And what's more pressure than some other guy being drafted in the first round ready to take your job, am I right? Combined with Michael Crabtree and Willie Snead, John Brown, and company being added to the team should provide him with the perfect basis and foundation to perform well this season. And if he doesn't, well, then maybe they're right and Lamar Jackson actually will start. But hey, now enough about Joe Flacco for once, more about Lamar Jackson. I mean, sitting in front of him, he's got RG3, he's got Joe Flacco. I just described what happened with Joe Flacco and RG3. While I believe that he can play better, I feel like the franchise would skip over him and probably end up with Lamar Jackson. Now, is he ready to touch the field is the real question. Lamar Jackson, most people just look straight at, they think, basic scrambling quarterback, because honestly, that's what I thought when I had first seen him too, until you really start studying him and then you learn he can make some pretty nice throws. And he's not necessarily as inaccurate as people would lead you to believe. If you just look at the stat sheet, it kind of shows that he's pretty inaccurate, but when you take into account the fact that he also led the league with drop passes from his receivers at 8.5%, which is pretty much double somebody like Josh Allen. People will be quick to believe that his receivers dropped everything, but his receivers dropped passes about 4.8% of the time compared to Lamar Jackson. So just like I said about Joe Flacco all of 30 seconds ago, if Lamar Jackson actually had better receivers in terms of catching, what he puts out and what he throws, his accuracy would be a lot higher. 8.5% of Lamar Jackson's passes were dropped, which is almost twice of Sam Darnold and Josh Allen. I played that last clip back and I know my voice cracked. I'm gonna get roasted by the squad later, but it's cool. And the other part of Lamar Jackson's game that slightly worried me when he first got drafted, or up until the time where I knew the Ravens would actually draft him, would be his run game. Now, the question really was, does he just scramble for the sake of scrambling, which a lot of quarterbacks do to make up for his lack of passing ability or any lack of passing ability he actually has, or does he actually scramble when need be? And after hearing all the talk around the NFL and analysts and everybody else worried about his run game as well, some people have even stated that if you actually pay attention, Lamar Jackson only scrambles on plays designated for him to scramble from the very beginning, which isn't much of scrambling at all. And I actually prefer that. That was actually a great thing to hear, which in my eyes makes him a little less of a scrambling quarterback and more of a quarterback who can scramble. Yes, there is a difference, obviously, in this case. In the NFL level, I would recommend myself, now who am I, obviously, but I prefer to watch more like the Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson type of tactic where you scramble just to make time, to make a play instead of actually taking off downfield, though, who doesn't enjoy seeing like Cam Newton play when he takes off? Lamar Jackson's performance all really depended upon the team he actually went to, and I feel like the Baltimore Ravens are the perfect place considering the fact that he has Marty Mornhinweg and Greg Roman, who are used to working with Michael Vick and Colin Kaepernick. I mean, who else would be better coaches than their coaches for Lamar? A lot of coaches actually get pretty lazy, I've heard, and don't feel like changing their plays, changing the offense, and actually being creative for the type of quarterback, so the quarterback, fails at the NFL level and then, bails out. So while Joe Flacco actually has this new chance to prove to the world that he can actually perform, considering the fact that they actually have some pretty useful weapons, Lamar Jackson has the perfect learning environment to actually sit behind him and learn. And though people will say, what could he possibly learn from Joe Flacco? People in the organization have already said right now running the offense is more like day and night, so that says Lamar Jackson has a lot more to learn. And just because someone's not good at doing doesn't mean, or has moments where they're inconsistent at doing. I can't say he can't, considering he won a Super Bowl. Doesn't mean they're not a great teacher. So while he can learn the pocket pass from Flacco, well, hopefully RG3 will teach him what not to do so he can actually stay healthy on the field. My point being, he has the perfect system to learn, and I don't think he should touch the field the entire year. I mean, if Joe Flacco somehow gets injured by another big man or something, I mean, do what you gotta do, but at the same time, I've never heard anybody personally say, oh man, I wish I hadn't stayed on the bench an extra year. Man, learning all that ruined my play. I don't hear anybody ever say that, so the longer the better. I don't care if he sits on the bench for 2 years. While I want to see him play as much as everybody else, I want him to be as good as possible. I kind of hope he comes out and pressing like Deshaun Watson did, or something like Aaron Rodgers. You know, I know that's a big thing to ask for in terms of being Aaron Rodgers, considering the fact that yeah, but hey, you know, Lamar Jackson's play all depends on his development in this Ravens training camp, and I feel like the members of the media and everyone around them who keep saying, well, you can't leave a guy like that on the bench, you can't leave a guy like that on the bench, just want to see him play. But usually the people that rush that type of thing are the first ones, media-wise, to kind of go after him for being bad when he shouldn't have been on the field in the first place. You had no business being on the field at the time, and had you just had another year or two to train, you would be good. The Baltimore Ravens were the perfect team for Lamar Jackson, mostly in my opinion because he didn't have to actually play, and he can end up playing and probably will end up replacing Joe Flacco. We just have to actually give it time. Don't forget to subscribe to Sack Nation and everything. Tell me what you guys think. Obviously, you know, it's our first video, or my first video on this channel, so everything's not necessarily perfect, but at the same time, I hope you enjoyed yourself. Don't forget to turn on that post notification. I said purse. Don't forget to turn on the post notification on that bell real fast so you know we can upload a video. We're going to be uploading videos every day, so you enjoyed this one, don't forget to subscribe. This is Brandon from Sack Nation, and yeah, hope you guys enjoy yourselves.